Hi there guys, got a video here for you today on the Leshiy 2. So in this one what I thought we'd do is I'd sort of point out all of the things that I've done to it, where I am on the tuning side of things, and just give you a little update on the rifle and how it's shooting. I've got the rifle now to a point where I'm semi-happy with it. Still a few things that need to be done to it, but I think accuracy wise and shooting the rifle is pretty good now. So first of all I'll just run through one or two little cosmetic changes I've made. The two main ones that I've done since you last saw the rifle is just replace the analogue gauges with some nice digital ones. There you go, that's the red gauge there. And then we got the same on the back, nice digital one. And that just replaces the old analogue wiki ones that were on there originally. Those ones there. With the digital gauges on there, it's just a bit easier to see your reg pressure and to calculate how many shots you're getting out of the rifle. The other little change I've made is replace the transfer port puck in here with a PTFE one. I noticed on the original red one that it was getting a little black as the magazine was rubbing across it. Also, if you looked at the magazine face, it was getting a little worn, so I decided to replace it with a PTFE one. Now the PTFE should do two things. Number one, create a nice slippery face so that there's no grab on the magazine as it spins around, and number two, it should hopefully seal better on the magazine face. So in theory it should be more efficient, as less air is going to be escaping around the magazine and more air is going to go down behind the pellet. The other thing I thought of doing was adding a little PTFE ring to the front of the barrel, and that's definitely a job that's going to be put on the to-do list. What I'll probably do is machine the face of the barrel with a little step in it and then press over and sleeve. That way both faces of the magazine will be running in PTFE guides, and it should create a better sealing surface on both sides of the pellet, so more air is trapped behind the pellet instead of escaping round the sides of the magazine. So whilst we're on the subject of efficiency and shot count, I just thought I'd mention how many shots I'm getting out of this rifle at the moment. So in its current configuration, from a 250 bar fill, I'm getting around 80 shots. Now to me that's not very efficient, and it's something I really want to improve on in the future. I know I could always add a bottle to the bottom here, but I don't really like how it makes the gun look a little chunky. I do however plan to make this rear section of air tube a little longer and replace some of the plenum with reservoir air. On the sub 12s you don't need a giant plenum, so reducing it should have no side effects and allow me to get a little extra air in the air tube. Speaking of the plenum, I have put a plenum plug in this rifle. Pretty much all of the plenums have been blanked off apart from a very small hole in the middle of the plug. So next what I think we'll do is I'll take apart the plenum and the valve, and I'll show you just a couple of little modifications I've made, and I'll get you a good look at the plenum plug. Right then, I've just quickly disassembled the rifle. A full disassembly video of the Leshiy 2 is on the way, so for now I'll just do a quick explanation of what I've done. So this is my plenum plug. As you can see there, the centre pulls out, so I have interchangeable centres with different size holes in them. This one here is a 3mm, this one's a 5, and they just simply change in there and then out. So when I'm tuning I can easily change the size of the plenum depending on how it's going. So this just falls in there like so and blanks a good deal of the volume of the plenum off. Obviously this is my custom plenum with the red gauge in it, but that's just how it works. Now you might be wondering, why do you need a plenum plug? Now the simple answer to that is to control the power. You can think of your plenum as the available air to the back of the valve. The more air you have, the larger the plenum, the higher your potential power can be. Since we're in the UK, or I'm in the UK, we're bound by the sub 12 foot-pound rule. This means our muzzle energy cannot exceed 12 foot-pounds, and therefore we have to alter our rifles in different ways to make sure they stay under that limit. So on the Leshiy 2 there are three main ways of controlling the power. Number one, the regulator pressure. The higher your regulator pressure, the higher your potential power. Not necessarily the higher your power will be, but it's your potential power. Number two is the puck size. The puck is basically your transfer port, so the larger your puck is, the more air is available to the back of the pellet and therefore your higher your power will be. And then the third option is the power jets. So this is the back of the valve, and these are the two power jets. These have an internal diameter or a hole drilled through them, and the larger that hole is, the quicker air is able to flow in and close the back of the valve. So the larger these jets are, the lower your power, the smaller they are, the valve stays open for longer, and therefore your power is higher. We'll talk more about this in a minute. And your final option, only really if you have access to a lathe, is controlling the volume of your plenum. So since I was already quite low on the regulator, I had my regulator set to 70 bar. I'd already used the maximum size jets, so the valve was being shut as fast as possible, and I don't really like the idea of choking the rifle down on the transfer port. I was left with the plenum. Reducing the size of the plenum lowers the potential power, as there's less air available to the back of the valve. Now with a full size plenum, or this is the standard size plenum, they do a shorter one and a longer one for FAC, but this one is the standard one. And the standard regulator needs to be running about 70 bar, enabled to stay under the 12 pound mark. Now that feels a little low for this regulator. It's quite a large diameter regulator, and in general regulators don't really like to be run below 80 bar. Some can, the AMP regulators can run very successfully under 80 bar, but most regulators are between the 80 and 110 mark. So reducing the plenum size simply allows you to increase the regulator pressure without fear of going over the sub 12 pound rule. I ended up having to set my regulator at 80 bar. I would have liked it higher, but I'll show you why in a second. But that's the plenum plug and a basic rule of how it works. Okay then, this is the main valve assembly of the Leshiy 2. Now as I said before, we're not going to do a full disassembly. That video will be coming later, but for now I'll just be showing you a little modification I made. Now if you follow Ed Gunn's official channel, you'll notice a few weeks ago he uploaded a video showing a couple new parts for the valve. There was sort of like a dog bone looking thing that went in this rear part here, and there was also a collar that went round the front of the brass valve housing. Now because those two parts were only fitted to the 177, 2.0 and 2.2 variants, I guessed it had something to do with the lower power models. Now from the start I pretty much guessed that the collar that went over here was just a way of restricting the airflow to the back of the pellet. Also looked like it had something to do with the magazine indexing. It might have choked that a little bit so that less air was being forced into the magazine indexing system. I don't know that yet, but I am trying to get a hold of the collar part to have a little test with it. But what I was able to do was simulate the dog bone part by just putting a little Delrin blanking plug in one of these drill-ins. Now as far as I could tell, these drill-ins don't actually go anywhere. They just add more volume to this piece and provide more air to the back of the valve. But what I found out when I installed the little plug, the plug's just a simple Delrin thing. I did make two, one to go in each, but I took that out for a reason I'll explain in a minute. So once I put one plug in, what happened was the rifle became quite consistent, but the power rose. It was running at low 11s and it jumped up to about 11.7 to 11.8, but the rifle did get much more consistent when I put this little plug in. Now I don't understand exactly how this valve works yet. I have a rough idea, but my general theory is that this whole area is in a sense a air spring. The air in here helps close the valve, so blanking off a little part of this chamber reduces the effectiveness of that spring and therefore causes the valve to close slower. However, this has a side effect in that it causes the rifle to become much more consistent. I was getting between a 25 and a 30 spread over the entire shot string of the rifle. When I put this little plug in, that spread reduced dramatically. It's now very consistent between magazines, and whilst I've only done one or two full shot strings, they've been very promising. I'm going to have a look and see if I can order both parts, the little dog bone piece that goes in here and the collar that goes around this brass valve housing. The little collar is quite complicated as it has an arm that reaches into the transfer port window, and it's also a bit moulded and a bit shaped. so I don't fancy really making one for myself. But I do want to get my hands on one, because maybe with both the dog bone and the collar fitted, I might be able to raise the reg pressure and hopefully increase the efficiency and get a few more shots out of it. Or that's my hope anyway. The final thing I wanted to mention quickly is just how the reg's working. Now I'm not going to get the reg out, but I just thought I'd tell you a couple of things that I've experienced with it. So number one, at the lower pressures it doesn't seem to work right. Anything below 70 bar you get an awful lot of regulator creep, and the shot to shot cycling is quite erratic. Now raising the reg pressure does cure this, so that's a good thing. But obviously when you're trying to stay under the sub 12 pound rule, it's not always an option. So what I'm going to be doing is a little bit more tinkering with it. I might take out a bevel or two, see if I can reduce that creep. And as I said before, if I can get the collar that goes around this brass valve housing, then I may be able to increase the reg pressure and negate some of that creep. Right then guys, so the last thing I wanted to do is show you a little trick I learnt when I was shooting and messing around with a rifle today. Now I noticed when I was loading one of my magazines, the pellets really like to be seated in these magazines. So what do I mean by that? So we'll load a magazine like so. Let's just use my speed loader and put the black cover plate on it. Now if you shoot the rifle like that, just straight loaded, I found I get a worse group than if I seat the pellets. So what do I mean by that? Simply speaking, I take an Allen key and just gently push on the back of the pellet until I feel the pellet gently stop. You're not pushing the pellets all the way through, but you're just stopping them from rattling around. So just gently seat the pellets all the way around like so. So if you take the black cover plate off, the pellets won't fall out. I found that gives me a much better group than just loosely loading the pellets. Right then, here's the results from the pellet seating. The groups on the top are the ones that have been seated in the magazine, and the ones at the bottom are just where the pellets have been put in loosely. As you can see, the groups along the top are much more consistent and there's not so many flyers in them. Now all of these groups are 8-shot groups, so an entire magazine worth of pellets, and I'm really quite happy with the ones on the top. There's 50 yards, and those first two groups I'm really quite impressed with. So I'll just leave you with a little clip of what the Leshiy 2 does best. We're at Pete's Airgun Farm here in the 50-yard range, and I just decided to put a whole magazine at the bell target at the end. Right then guys, that's going to about do it for this one. A little update on the Leshiy 2 and just a little update of where I am on the tuning process. It's getting better, I'm actually happy with the rifle now, and just a few more tweaks, hopefully a little better efficiency, I'll be really pleased with it. So with that being said, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.